with, of course, the involvement of France in Africa, amongst other stories.
Absolutely. France, we have reports that the President Emmanuel Macron has said that the era of French interference in Africa was well over as he began a four-nation tour of the continent to renew frayed ties. Anti-French sentiment runs high in some former African colonies as the continent becomes a renewed diplomatic battleground with Russian and Chinese influence growing in the region.
Now, Macron said France harbored no desire to return to past policies of interfering in Africa. Macron and his predecessors, notably Francois Hollande, have previously declared that the policy is dead and that France has no intention of meddling in sovereign affairs. In line with this, let's now quickly, of course, bring in our East Africa journalist, Darren Bartlett. Good morning, Darren. Thanks for joining us.
Morning. How are you?
All right, of course, let's get, begin the conversation with, the involvement of France, and of course, President Macron, of course, making statements, that maybe nobody expected him to be making a year ago. He's slated to be in the DRC, in a bit. However, some Congolese have taken to the streets to protest his visit. Why are they raising their voices against the French leader's visit? And can we, also understand maybe what might be going on with the power shift between France and Russia/China?
Well, over the past few days, a few groups of people, Congolese, protested outside the French embassy, protesting President Macron's, visiting the country. And for them, their concerns were about France. According to them, they allege that France actually is in bed with Rwanda, and of which Rwanda is supporting the M23, the militia that has destabilized the eastern parts of DRC. Now, I just want to give you a little bit background and why most people think, including myself, believe that maybe this group that is protesting his arrival needs to understand the relationship or the background of the relationship between France and Rwanda. If you go back as far as the genocide in Rwanda, Rwanda itself believes that France was behind or supported or had a minimal support or in what happened in Rwanda, something that led to the genocide. In fact, many times the Rwandan government has always said that the French government supported the Hutu government at that time and also provided military support in terms of equipment, weaponry, to some militia group that they called Interahamwe in Rwanda at that time. So it's actually not fair to say that France supports Rwanda, which Rwanda again also supports the M23 with militias, ammunition or the arsenal supply. If you realize that even France recently came out and supported the statement or made same statements as the UK and US to accuse Rwanda of supporting the M23. So that's why this protest wasn't really that popular, because most people understand that Rwanda and France are actually diplomatically they have a relationship. But many times Rwanda has accused France for even hiding people who they allege supported the genocide in Rwanda in 1994. But here's the thing. I think the focus should be, why is France now trying to create new relationships in the region after moving out from the West African countries? We've seen Burkina Faso, the Malis are all pushing out France. But France is now trying to create new allies. And it finds DRC one of the suitable allies because they're French-speaking, one. But also, two, there is a goal in Europe to say that they are banning probably cars, fuel cars, and they're moving to electric cars. Now, DRC probably is the biggest supply of minerals that actually support the manufacture of electronic cars. And China, Russia, America, which also just signed a treaty with DRC recently to support the same materials that make electronic cars, have been scrambling for DRC. And France looked at itself as part of the G7 and has been left out into the scramble for DRC. I would call it that, the scramble of DRC, because many powerful countries are running into DRC, trying to provide aid in return, of course, for something that they call trade. I would be very, I'll put the quotes to that.
No, it's okay if you say that. Say it as it is, because I mean, my thoughts. Is this squabble for DRC, is it genuine, or is it really just to expand political influence in these parts of the continent?
You see, me and you know that there are so many forces in DRC. Of course, the UN has been there for the longest time trying to provide security, which has not succeeded in that mandate. We've seen it's alleged that the Russian Wagner group is in DRC. We know that Pakistan army is in DRC. We know so many armies, over 100 armies, by the way, including Uganda, the East African Force is in DRC, but peace has never returned there. And yet we know that over the 100 militia groups that are in DRC, some of them are there and they are exporting minerals illegally. And there's a report that came out one time that implicated that even the Teslas of this world, other car manufacturers have been taking minerals from DRC. There's that report. So when you see France coming in now, the timing is questionable. They have left to the West Africa and they are coming in the name of peace, but there are also goals that they want to achieve minerals from DRC. So it is what it is. So it's not about the relationship of France with Rwanda. Those people are mistaken. The protesters are mistaken. And with due respect, I respect their cause, but this relationship is more than what the eye can see. That's what I would say.
All right, let's move away from this relationship that is more than the eyes can see and talk about another part of the continent. Let's start with the visit of Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni to South Africa, where President Cyril Ramaphosa has been described as, he has described this as a stepping stone towards establishing robust political and economic ties between the two nations. The purpose of President Museveni's visit to South Africa, the discussions held between the two leaders, their goals for the future, are points of interest. So can you please give us further insight on the two countries and their relationship?
Now, Uganda is trying to establish a relationship with many African countries so that they can promote trade. And South Africa is one of those that had a huge difference. There is a trade imbalance between Uganda and South Africa. Uganda today manufactures cars and electronic cars and electronic buses. Previously, South Africa has been supplying Uganda with electronics. Now, because that manufacturing of such products that South Africa was manufacturing and providing to Uganda has now been closed, they needed to explore other ways of how they can grow trade. And Uganda and the Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni and Ramaphosa sat down and looked at other opportunities that the two countries can explore and grow the difference that was already in between there. South Africa alone exports goods worth $28 million to Uganda, and Uganda exports only $13 million. And to close that gap, they were discussing other things other options like agriculture, which Uganda is doing very well and exporting its agricultural products and things like coffee. But the catch here and the relationship that we're trying to establish is how do we support the movement of people between Uganda and South Africa. Already South Africa has established its relationship with Kenya, and that Kenyans can go to South Africa without, and they get a visa on arrival, which is not the case for Uganda. So those are some of the concerns that they raised and said, whereas we want to support trade, our traders, especially Ugandan traders, find it difficult to go to South Africa because they need a visa. They have to wait for a visa, and most times, or sometimes, they have been denied this visa. So those are the lines of relationships they are trying to establish. Uganda has not been so close to the SADC region, which is the South African countries region in terms of trade. And Uganda has been mostly trading with the North African countries like Morocco, Algeria, trading milk. So that is the gap that they felt as the African trade area, delays to be established. There is need for individual countries like Uganda and South Africa to create their own relationship and improve on the trade directions in that direction. However, the President Yoweri Museveni has been recognized for peace and because he helped in fighting apartheid in in South Africa, and that's why he was actually awarded a medal for his contribution towards that fight there. But yeah, that's the instinct, that's the side of it.
All right, interesting. And of course, all these are happening in a time when the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, is also going through, bits of political turmoil here and there, so yeah. We'll see where it leads. But now in Tanzania, we also have reports that opposition politician, God bless Lema, has returned home from exile in Canada, even as a former presidential candidate, Tundu Lissu, also returned from the Netherlands after a meeting with President Suluhu, I beg your pardon. What does this mean for the political landscape in Tanzania? I understand that President Suluhu is trying to, open up the space for more opposition parties and for a more welcoming space, for politics, basically in Tanzania.
Tanzania has not been. It didn't have that what most opposition members in Tanzania would call a fair landscape in terms of politics and practice. If you remember that the late President Magufuli, who Suluhu actually replaced after his death, he had closed those gaps. He had banned civic activities, rallies, and for him it was after elections such conventions should not happen. And those are the things that Suluhu has undone ever since this year, when she opened up some space and said, no, civil activities can go ahead and happen. Political oppositions can still go ahead and gather, something that President Magufuli had banned. And there's been an eye spot on her ever since she came in power, because they were looking at her as a lady one, and what can she do to undo what President Magufuli had done? No, I mean, kudos to him. He did so many things in terms of development, but in terms of engagement with the opposition was never really his spot. He never worked well with them. He arrested many political oppositions. Lissu himself was shot a number of times just after an election, and he ran to exile. He was airlifted to Kenya, of course, for treatment, and then after ran to Netherlands, where he was in exile. Now, they're saying the return of such opposition members gives the opposition hope that maybe finally another party at one time is going to have maybe to take power and maybe have a fair representation in policy decision-making issues. But there's one thing that is on the table that these opposition members want to see. Yes, they have been allowed to participate in civic activities, but they are chasing one thing: the change of the constitution. This constitution has been in conversations for a long time, especially the opposition feel it's unfair. If you familiarized yourself with that constitution, you'll realize that they never contest an election. Once you're defeated, once an election has been announced that someone has won, you cannot go to court and contest that election. So those are some of the clauses that they feel they need to change in the constitution. And this allowing of the participation of the opposition members to come and participate in civic activities is just hope that Suluhu is going to have a conversation on the change of the constitution. That is the actual test of the return of the members of the opposition members to Tanzania.
I mean, you've spoken so highly about the things that she's done, and how the opposition is excited about these changes. In the time of John Magufuli, there were threats to annihilate the opposition, but she's giving them a voice and giving them a platform to speak. And in a few seconds, I'm asking this because it's Women's Month, so as much as possible, we're going to keep celebrating women. Samia Suluhu Hassan is the first president of Tanzania, and has, quite frankly, made a lot of reforms that's gaining her fans. So how would you rate the highlights, of Samia Suluhu Hassan's time in office so far?
I would give her a 7. One, she acknowledged that there was COVID in the country, something that Magufuli did not acknowledge, and people were dying. Actually, high-ranking officers in the government of Magufuli died of COVID, and he still refused to acknowledge it. It's also believed that actually President Magufuli could have died of COVID, something they never released. It's not public information. They never put it out there, but yes, that's what it's believed to be. And you realize girls who were pregnant, there was a policy, girls who were pregnant would not continue with school. Some of the things that Suluhu has reversed. They arrested a number of political opposition members. something that she undid and released most of them. Many media houses were closed doors that they believed were anti-government. The same media houses were reopened when Suluhu took power. Suluhu has gone ahead and created relationships with people, with governments like China and other countries, something that President Magufuli had refused because he believed that those foreign countries were here to take what the Tanzanians had. And yet, in the actual sense, you realize that Tanzania also had debts with the Chinese. And she has come in to mend those relationships. And I can say that she has done a 7 or to 8 out of 10.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us. I'm hoping that our viewers from Tanzania can also share with us their thoughts. And it's important that we celebrate the highlights of these women who are making exceptional strides around the continent, especially this month, as it's Women's Month. Thank you very much, Darren Bartlett. It's always a pleasure to have you join us on Fridays. By next week Friday, I hope you have some more stories about women. We'll bring some more women who are making marks around the continent. Okay.